It's great to see all of you in this room where most of us have never been, but we have someone here with us who have been here before, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here, and I will introduce you in a second in a proper way. My name is Kathrin Pabst. I'm the project manager of Identity on the Line, a large-scale Creative Europe project which has been going on for 4 years. And this is the starting point for being here. We are very grateful to a Member of Parliament, Mr. Walter Flego, who gave us the possibility to come into the European Parliament and meet our 3 experts, can I say, politicians. I will introduce you properly in a second, who will discuss with us what we can do with the findings of our project and the recommendations we have developed altogether. Identity on the Line has since 2019 worked with the 3-generational perspective. We are 6 museums and 1 university from 7 European countries who had the unique possibility, because of a Creative Europe program, to collaborate together, develop methods, and in total interview 164 people in the 7 countries. The interviews have lasted, Maria, could you make a change, please? The interviews have lasted for 2 to 15 hours, each of them, and we have a large empirical material. What was special with our project is that we thought that for the first time, it's not only the generation who has experienced something we would like to talk to, but we wanted to find out what is under the surface in the society, what is lying there, what nobody is talking about, but what is affecting the 2nd and 3rd generation of migrants as well. Everybody is thinking about the migrants, which are very important questions. How do we treat migrants? But what is with the 2nd and 3rd generation who might relate to trauma, which are not properly addressed? What is happening with them? And in that relation, we also have to think about the policies, which of course address most urgent challenges here and now. And I am asking today, all of you, and also our panel, are there any possibilities to include a 3-generational perspective into policies and think a little bit more ahead than what we are doing, even if we have a large urgent challenges? Can you please go on, Maria? Of course, there is no possibility to tell you very much about the project now. Everything is on the internet, but we have, as I said, focused on the feelings of people. We have focused on our informants' very personal stories, which they have never shared before with us. I think you can go on. You will find everything on the internet, exhibitions we have produced, we have digital exhibitions, we have scientific articles, we have movies, 8 different languages, we have had webinars, workshops, we have school packages for children, and the overall goal of everything we have done is to see 7 European countries, 7 migration processes which never have been addressed before. Where are the similarities? What combines all the migrants, no matter which country, no matter which migration process, no matter actually almost what happened? What is it with silence? What is it with not daring to address the real tough stuff, which makes it so hard for the 2nd and 3rd generation to relate to it? I also want to say now already that I personally think that this will lead to less sustainable societies than we would see, because all the time there is something going on which nobody talks about, and this something leads to people not trusting each other, having in their head some conceptions, some ideas about how the other is, because it's maybe gone on for generations and have never really been addressed in a proper way. We are very grateful for this project. As you can see, we have a lot of spin-offs which were not planned. We have new research projects, we have new methods developed. This was a fantastic project for all the museums involved. Also my museum as a lead museum, the Westdokter Museum. And we would today like to discuss with you what now with our findings. Thank you. And the main questions today are: could a 3-generational perspective add value to today's migration policies? And if yes, why and how? So my question I would like to address to the round table today Do you see a value in a three-generational perspective? And what could this value be? Do you agree or disagree that it might lead to more sustainable societies? Maybe you have personal experiences about something in the society which has not been addressed. And to Mr. Zampieri, I have also the question, you as a chief leader, we are coming back to that, maybe you have some input how projects as ours really could contribute to change and new policies. Is there a possibility to connect the findings of cultural institutions in the best possible way with policies? Can they at least be considered in a good way? Or is that what we're doing here today exactly what I'm asking for? So I would like to introduce the round table. The round table starts with a person who is unfortunately not here, Mrs. Irena Joveva from Slovenia, a member of parliament since 2019. And we will start in a few minutes with a short intervention from her in a video. Afterwards, I'm very grateful and happy that we have with us Mrs. Magdalena Adamowicz, member of parliament since 2019 from Poland. You are also an educated lawyer. You have a doctorate degree as a lawyer. And among others, you are a substitute member of Law Committee and Committee of Civil Freedom, Justice and Internal Affairs. And we are very grateful that you will be our main member of parliament in this room today, and that we afterwards, in the end of this roundtable discussion, will have the possibility to address you with our findings, which we really highly appreciate. Afterwards, we will hear from Mr. Walter Zampieri. I have found out, I don't know if it's updated, but you have been in the European Commission for 21 years and 3 months. And the most recent position is the head of the unit for culture, the European Education and Culture Executive Agency. I think this is right. And according to our project officer, and you are his boss, you know everything about the stages, so we are very much looking forward to listen to you. And I would also like to introduce Dr. Wiebke Sievers, a researcher, a migration researcher at the Austrian Academy of Science in Vienna since 2003. And he teaches and has taught at several universities and had keynote for us today. You are a member of the executive board and chair of board of directors of the biggest European research network of migration, IMISCU, and co-coordinator of IMISCO's Standing Committee Super Diversity, Migration and Cultural Change. So, we would like to start with the intervention of Mrs. Joveva. And after our roundtable discussion starts, we start with a short presentation of each member. I'm done with my presentation, and after Mrs. Joveva, it's your turn. We will have a discussion of some questions, and would afterwards very much like to invite all of you to maybe also ask questions to our roundtable. I will be the moderator, and I'm looking very much forward to this event. So thank you to all of you for being here. I think we will just start with a round table and take the intervention a little bit later. Mrs. Adamowicz, may I ask you to kindly start with your introduction presentation?
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm very proud that I can be here and meet with you. The manager of the project said that we will have that we are the experts, so we have some experts, but I really do not feel as an expert for migrations, but I feel more like one who is the third generation of the family who migrate to Słupsk. I tell how it was. So I'm really very happy to be here, and this is important for me because one of the participants of this project is Museum of Central Pomerania in Słupsk, with Mr. Kathrin represented here. The Słupsk is the city in the north of Poland on the Baltic Sea, and I was born in this city. I spent all my youth. I finished primary school, secondary school, and today I live in Gdańsk, but in Słupsk I had all my grandparents, the rest of my family, so it's something very, very close to me. So although I know Słupsk, let's say, very well, the project, the identity online, helped me to look at my city completely different, and the history of the inhabitants from a new perspective. So it was more personal and even somehow more intimate, showing many dramatic ways of historical events that affected people's fates in those difficult years of post-war turmoil. So, then maybe I will add some my personal experience. So the Słupsk, it's the city which is called Ziemie odzyskane, which means that we are coming back to the piece of land that used to be Polish before, but that never was actually. And after moving the borders after Second World War, many people from the eastern part of Poland was sent to the western parts that we got as a kind of recompensation from Germans, and for the land that we gave already, that were taken from us in Russia and were taken from Germans, and so and those sides of my family, so from my father's sides, they were just their towns and villages were completely destroyed, and they were just went to the train that goes to Szczecin towards some coast of the sea, and they went to Gdańsk. They saw it's completely destroyed, and then the next big city was Słupsk. So the center of the city, which was somehow destroyed, was not in a very short distance to the train station. So surrounding the train station was looking okay. So they said, okay, so we live here. Maybe we can find a piece of roof for us and stay here. Yes. So they come from the center of Poland where the war came and back comes here and there for 7 times, so there was nothing. It was completely destroyed. And from the hand of from the other side of my mother, my grandmother, she was the victim of the concentration camp Auschwitz with her mother. So they spent many years in Auschwitz, but then were taken to Flossenburg in so-called death, walking for the death. And my granddad, he was on the he was returning from forced labor in Germany, and just was looking for the place. So 4 of my granddads grandparents, which have privilege and the luck to know and to live with them for a long time, because the last one died in 2012, were migrants to the city, which used to be German city, and many German people used to be there, and they were sent back in the beginning or in the middle of 40s. So it was a place where lived together between 1945 till 1955 maybe. The original Germans, the people from different Polish places where their homes were destroyed. The people, these Polish people who used to live in Ukraine, in Belarus, so the eastern part. So it was a big mixture of many nations, of many religions, because it was like Protestants, Catholics, and Greek Catholics, or Pravos, well, I don't know how it's it in English. Orthodox Catholics. So it was this big mixture, and I was raising among, I mean, not all these people, because it was before, and then the Germans were sent back, and the so-called Polish different roots people mixed together. And today I can feel some influence of that it was a different, the mixture society, yes. So this was something very personal that I wanted to add to the speech, and coming back to what I prepared. So the post-war years of turmoil, so border changes, migrations, and forced resettlement, which meant having to leave one's homeland and travel to unknown, to a foreign country, setting off into the unknown, into a foreign world, usually under a different and difficult condition. And when they reached this new place, they had to build their lives anyway. This was a very painful experience, was a tremendous shock, and not only left a big mark in the physics of those who were involved in these dramatic events, but also had an impact on the loved ones, as shown in this project. So let me just come to that we cannot change our past, but we can learn from it and try to change for the better the reality around us, especially as migration is a global challenge today. This was precisely the idea that guided my late husband, Adamowicz, who was a mayor of a city of Gdańsk for more than 20 years. Initiated the first scheme for the integration of migrants in Poland under the name of Gdańsk Immigrant Integration Model, which for some last years was a model very often taken for other cities as something that really went well in Gdańsk. And please allow me to quote his words regarding to this important initiative. We want to give immigrants the chance to build a decent, normal life here. We want to counteract their exclusion. Many inhabitants of Gdańsk have also gone out into the world looking for these values. We are convinced that counteracting exclusion, sensible hospitality, and openness is a guarantee of building a community based on traditional Gdańsk values. And these values are respect, tolerance, justice, and solidarity. So, just to sum up, I wanted to add that, well, I'm quite new in politics, and to politics brought me the dramatic situation of what has happened to our family, which was the murder of my husband. And it was due to this that there was a big hate speech campaign against him in Poland. Due to his tolerance, openness to the LGBTI people, to migrants. So one of his initiatives was to ask some other mayors from the bigger cities to write a common letter to our government that the cities can help with the migrants' politics, and the cities themselves can manage to burden and to invite some migrants to help with this big migration crisis, which started in Europe 2014-15. And when they make these initiatives and they make the event to sign this, all these mayors of the cities became so-called documentation from the nationalists, which was the death certificate. Yes, so it was done on an example how this really document when someone died look like, and it was shown in internet, and many actions against openness to the migrant, to welcome all the people, to be tolerant, has happened in Poland, and I know in other countries. And after the death of my husband, I decided to speak about what has happened and to warn the people that the hate is something very cruel, and then the words can kill the other person. So that was my initiative, the campaign Imagine There Is No Hate. And when I think now, very often because I was thinking, how did hate come and why the people hate each other? And very often the migration immigrants are one of the subjects that they are very often the victims of the hate speech, because there are some stereotypes about them, because we are scared of someone we don't know, because we feel better only in our homogenic community. And therefore, I consider that this project is extremely important to our society, which is now has got a lot of problems, is now in line due to what happened even in our Polish border, Polish-Belarusian border, what has happened in Ukraine. This is something that if we see that being open, that being curious of the other culture, of the other experience, the other religion, the other cuisine, it makes us richer not only as a society but also in economically, because it's shown. There are some researches that the more diverse the society is, even the economically richer it is and more established. So I'm very grateful for your findings, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution, and it's very impressive to hear how your whole family is engaged and was engaged in such an important topic and fight hate speech. And what we found in the project, and Mike, I'm back to that, if the migrants are not treated like you need with the respect, actually the words you mentioned, the feeling of being different and an outsider goes on. And then we are back to what you said, that we very soon come to societies which foster people who hate each other. Thank you. Mr. Zampieri, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. As Kathrin said, I'm Walter Zampieri. I'm the head of unit of the cultural part of the Creative Europe program in the Executive Agency for Education and Culture. So I hope, maybe you already know about the Creative Europe program, so I'll just say a few words, not much, but this is the only EU program that focuses specifically on culture. There are other instruments actually that you might find more interesting. Let's say, the example, if you want to restore a cathedral, probably you shouldn't come to us. You should use the structural funds, or you should use the national funds. On the other hand, we are the only ones who really fund partnerships between organizations in different countries participating in the program, which is bigger, it's larger than the European Union itself. So, having said that, thank you for this invitation, because it makes me quite proud, actually, of these projects. Personal connection, I think it was one of the first projects that I signed up, that I approved, because in 2019, when I started in the executive agency. Previously, I had worked for cultural policy in the Commission, so I've been working for about 10 years in cultural affairs, let's say like that. Why is apart from this, why is the project so important? Because are important the results, and we look at that, and it's important actually that it was done at European level. I think it was also quite important. We have many projects on cultural heritage. On any given day, we have between in total 700, 800 projects. And every year we add some 130, 150, 170. So it's a lot of projects, and about 15–20% of them are about cultural heritage. So it's a lot. It's a lot, but yours here is different. I will explain why. 2019 it came immediately after the European Year of Cultural Heritage. And we had started some reflection in the Commission before that. No? We started in 2014 with a Commission communication that was the official decision about the year and so on, and we went on with the implementation. What was the key message for the European year and our policy on cultural heritage is that heritage is about people. No? It's not about stones, it's not about objects. Why is that? Because it's what the Council of Europe calls the values of cultural heritage, and we call it the meaning. The meaning is in people, actually. Within people, it's not about the objects. And it's very important to transmit the meaning and the values of cultural heritage to the new generation. Because if you don't do it, it's simply a dead stone, and there's nothing that remains. So the message is the values are at least as important as the objects and the cultural buildings, whatever it is we're talking about now. So it's about people. Museums, for instance, are places for people, no? Not simply for preserving the objects, as important as it is, obviously. We don't want to dismiss that. But museums have to be places for people coming together, exchanging, learning things, training, education, obviously very, very important. And your project is, of course, about people. I mean, we'll talk about that, but that's the most important feature, I think. No? It's about people, it's about preserving their memory and passing their message. No? It's also over time, of course, that's how cultural heritage is built, no? Over time, in this case we have 3 generations we're talking about, but also across borders. No? And this is a more delicate, if you want, issue we're discussing about, no? Because we're discussing forced migration. But as a parenthesis, it's very important to remember that cultural heritage is never extremely local. No? It might be always placed somewhere, but it's never exclusively local. It's always the result of something else, which is the interaction with other people, in most cases really with other populations which are now on another border. Because at the end of the day, it's very, very difficult to find an object, a site, a building that is exclusively, I'm Italian, exclusively Italian. What does it mean? I mean, there will always be interactions with other people and other cultures in particular. So this is about why it should be about a European space. And it's also essential that we look at the most controversial pages of European history, the most controversial issues. No? It's not just about the story of how glorious we have been and we started with the Romans and so on. No, it's really about the darkest pages. We just had, actually, it was just presented very, very clearly and very, very moving, you know, the darkest pages of European history. On a lesser scale, because some of these examples of your project, your study, are lesser known, let's say, are less known than other events. I also have a small, actually, personal connection, because I was born in a corner of Italy, which is in northeast, and many Italians that came from Istria actually came to my region. And I was born to, I was born much later after that. But my mother went to school actually with people who had been just left Istria. Just to say an example that everything is really connected. You know? And this is a European space even before we started thinking about the European space of culture, European political culture. The events, historic events, came into us in any case. So we were already Europeans. And it's very, very good that we start thinking about these consequences. Now, last thing to say is about forced migration. Forced migration is a history of traumas at the end of the day. It's a collective trauma. And like many other things, actually, like many other examples of disadvantage, educational disadvantage, social disadvantage, poverty, they go from one generation to the other. So it's essential that we look at what are the consequences also for the integration, but also for culture. And we do have, unfortunately, there are examples historically. I mean, we have what happened to the survivors of the Shoah. In many cases, it's a tragedy of survivors which continued even after their liberation. I don't have to mention famous writers, from Primo Levi to others. But of course, also the Native Americans. There's a very, very long research studies about that. The First Nations in Canada or Australia. And now Sweden, and also what happened in Greenland from Denmark. These pages need to be studied, need to be known also by all Europeans. And unfortunately, this is not a past of the thing, no? This a thing of the past. No, it's still continuing. It's continuing in Ukraine. A few years ago, in 2016, when there was the big crisis in Syria, we also started working about culture in the refugee camps in Lebanon and in other camps. I don't want to preempt the discussion that we will have with the round table, but yes, my reply is clearly that his culture is particularly very, very important in order to preserve the identity of people. And if not preserve identity, there will be very bad outcomes, very bad outcomes of the people. So thank you very much for the project.
Thank you very much, of course, not only for the possibility to do this project, but also what you said. I just have a few comments before it is your turn. And the first comment is that one of our findings was, as you said, that trauma and painful memories are passed on. Of course, as cultural history workers, museum professionals working at the university, we are no psychologists, but we really digged deep into trauma. And memory is affected, of course, by trauma. And we met traumatized people who not even were aware that they were traumatized. This did something to us. This did something to them. And it was a very educational process where we learned a lot, and hopefully we could also affect someone of our informants and of other visitors. I don't want to ask you something. Maybe I want to make one reflection before we go on. And this is, we were 7 European countries, as everyone knows, and in some of the countries, the national tendencies grew stronger during the last 4 years. Of course, in many countries, we see national tendencies more and more, and also in some of our countries. And we saw that in some countries, it was totally okay to talk about whatever you want. You said, of course, the controversial issues have to be on the surface, of course. We also want that. But not all national parties in the countries generally agree. And what I would very much like to discuss in this room, if the overall construction, if I'm allowed to call it like that, the European Union, is careful or not so careful in addressing the difficult subjects, because here you gather a lot of nationalities. Some of the nationalities do not want to talk about the tough stuff. I speak very generally now, but some of our issues why have they never been addressed before? Why have the people never shared their story? Because this is tough stuff. And in some cases, the government, as in Norway, have made a lot of mistakes. In other countries it was different. But so my question, which I would like to address somehow in this room, are there differences between the countries who want to suppress in some cases, generally speaking, the tough stuff or the difficult topics, the sensitive stories, because they do not fit in the picture one wants to present? And does the European Union back off if the countries want that? Or is there any kind of progress? It's a wrong word. I'm really putting it to the point, so please excuse me. It's not meant as a provocation, just as a discussion point. Mrs. Sievers, so if I keep this introduction, please.
Thank you very much. You just mentioned that trauma is one of the things you looked at, and that trauma is passed down the generations, and that's actually the starting point of my comment to the three-generational perspective. Does it add value to today's migration policies? And I answer this question from the perspective of migration studies. So I want to make 2 points, really. The first point is what you do to migrants today will have effects for generations to come. So that, I think, is a very, very important point to make. And I don't only mean what you do to refugees in their countries of origin, but also what you do to refugees when they move into another country, when they are received there, and when they arrive in a different spot. So what does this mean in practice? Many EU states make migrants, and in particular refugees, feel from the start that they do not belong, that they do not have the right to be treated as human beings, that the respective nationals are superior to them. And this, of course, is kind of going to stay for generations to come if you treat a person like that. It's a memory you carry along the line, also among the migrants. And how does this happen? Of course, you have the original trauma of many refugees, and that's the reason why they leave their country of origin. But there are also many regulations that re-traumatize and further traumatize migrants. Let's think, for example, about the fact that migrants or refugees cannot enter the European Union to claim asylum without coming illegally. Most of them have to come here illegally, so that is the only way to enter and to claim asylum. And of course then, in daily speech, they are denigrated as illegals, they are discussed as not being allowed to be here, and that's also a term that strips them of their human rights. So this is a very first paradoxical situation that you make them come as illegals and then you actually denounce them for doing this thing. Or let's think of the problem that they cannot just take an airplane to come to the European Union. I mean, why do we not give refugees visa so that they can get on the plane and fly here? No, they have to take the very long journey from the countries of origin, go all the way through many, many countries. We know how many traumatizing experiences come there that add to the original trauma, and people that end up here will pass that on for many generations to come. There's also, when they arrive in the European Union, the dehumanizing treatment by administrative personnel. So in the asylum procedures, we would expect that they could tell their stories, but in fact that is not what is happening. The administrative personnel has to dissect their stories and to dissect these human beings to find the lies. That is the original idea of a migration an asylum procedure. So this very often leads to a re-traumatization of the asylum seekers. And it's another problem that we have in these, adding to the original trauma that they already bring with them. Then there are the enormously long waiting periods. So they stay in asylum homes and can't do anything at all. I mean, at least in Austria, they are not allowed to work. I mean, the European Union wants people to work after half a year. Austria hasn't put that into practice, so basically they stay in these asylum centers waiting for their decisions for sometimes 10 years and even longer, which is of course again very depressing, frustrating for the person who already carries a trauma with them. And last but not least, of course, there are the anti-migrant narratives that come from politics and the media. There's a wide acceptance in many countries in the European Union of racism, of Islamophobia, and that of course again affects people in their daily lives. They experience verbal abuse, they experience violence, and again this adds to the trauma that they already carry with them. So there are these many steps that add to the trauma already here in the European Union, and I think if you treat migrants like that or refugees like that, you shouldn't be surprised that there are consequences. So first of all, I think that's also quite well been shown in the project. These refugees are being silenced. They have a trauma, they fear that they will be abused, discriminated, deported, whatever, if they tell their stories. So another reaction we very often see for these groups of people is that they withdraw from the majority into their minority. So they feel safer among their group of people, they feel that they belong to this group of people rather than getting in contact with the majority. And that's another problem we see among many migrants, they may become susceptible to mobilization by politicians in their country of origin. And these politicians appeal to their bruised egos and make them feel pride in themselves. I'm thinking here of Erdogan for the Turkish migrants in Germany and in Austria, but also of Putin for the Russian Germans. You can see how this appeals to migrants who feel that they are not accepted in their country where they live. And as I said, this may continue over generations. It's a transfer of a trauma, and of course this is made worse if the exclusion and discrimination continues. This is the negative message that I wanted to tell you. There's also a positive message that what we can learn from a three-generational perspective is that change is possible. So we don't need to stay in this kind of status. And this is not so much coming from your project, although I found the idea in the Wiebke case very, very positive in the sense of that the community They perhaps didn't remember very much of their original stories, but at least there was not this kind of exclusion and discrimination of individuals because they found a new way of living together. So it is possible to come to such a stage. I'm thinking here more of a book that is called Remaking the American Mainstream, that was published by Alba and Nee, and that looks at US society in the 20th century, so from the late 19th century to the 20th century. And they argue that basically, at the beginning of the 20th century, America was still dominated by white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who basically were the mainstream society. But of course, from the late 19th century onwards, so 1850s to 1920s, a lot of immigrants went to the United States from Ireland, Germany, Italy, and Eastern Europe, who were regarded as foreigners and as unassimilable. They were even very often described as black, so even the Irish were described as black. So similar to many situations we see in the European Union today, so for example the Turkish migrants in Germany or in Austria. However, what happened in the course of the 20th century is that these groups became part of the mainstream. They are now perceived as whites, of course, nobody would ever question that. They kept their religious diversity. So the mainstream now also includes Jewish and Catholic people. So the mainstream has changed to include these groups, and that's something that can happen. And it has also happened, for example, with regard to Italians in Germany. So change is possible, and the authors argue it's also possible because there is this argument, okay, but let's think about Muslims, let's think about Asians. With these groups, this is impossible. There's a hard argument there. But the authors argue, why should it not happen again? It may happen in a different way, but it can happen, and we should be looking forward to that. So that was my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Of course, here's also very much one could talk more about. I just memorized here that memories of not being treated with respect always go in the generations. I think this is a very important point for all of us who meet other people. You said also change is possible and referred to a very important example, but I just want to say that we saw, after talking to this 164 informants, that something happened in the families of the informants, something happened with the informants, something happened in the societies in the way that we were, more and more people reached out to us afterwards. They didn't share their stories before, they didn't dare to talk, but when they saw the first people telling their story and finally realized they are not alone with their experiences, they started to talk, and something happened in the family, within the generations. This is, I don't want to use the word healing here because we have to do much more research, okay? But we really saw a difference in the people and how proud they became of their stories when they finally dared to tell them. But there has to be space which takes these stories, which opened up for the stories and not suppressed. But it's not me who is going to talk so much, so I'm just the moderator. I would like, before we open up for questions, now all of you have presented your very interesting starting points. If you listen to the others, and we have the overall question, the three-generational perspective, do you agree that it's still missing? Do you agree that we are concentrating, important enough, on the urgent aspects of migration? You have to be integrated fast, you have to get help to get work, as you say, but that we are not good enough yet to really always have in mind in awareness that it's always going on if you don't address it properly. This intergenerational aspect, I still miss it. Do you see it? Maybe better than I. If you think about your experience, if I just listen to your own family story, and now I'm at your grandparents, sorry, you must be terribly traumatized just by your grandparents. And I myself am a German, so I have the same, in my way, not in your way. So, but my point is, do you agree our findings, the intergenerational perspective, there is something here, or would you say, sorry, with the situation we face in Europe at the moment, with so many migrants who really need urgently help here and now, we can't concentrate also already now on the long-term perspective?
I think that it should be combined, and we should find a balance between urgent help, because the urgent help is really something that it's now and here, and it has to be done. If all these people from Ukraine who were a year ago, coming to Poland were left alone, I cannot imagine what would have happened, yes? So it is something that if the other person is in need, you have to act. But then, what should be done, which I think, because I personally know how to help from the perspective with Ukraine, when you give this first urgent help, then you need to think about other issue, about future of the person, about psychological help, about not only to make the people happy with giving them a piece of bed, a piece of food, and a home, but only to give them a real environment to live and to develop and to integrate with the society. So I observe now many initiatives in Poland that we do not only help the people, but we think a lot about schools, what to do at our schools, because we have many Ukrainian children, how to make them to feel better, how to help them to integrate with the other people. The same with the other generation. So on Saturday we opened a new neighborhood home in Gdańsk, and it was amazing for me because there was an amateur choir for seniors, and they were Polish and Ukrainian, half members. And they meet in this house and they exercise together, they sing together, and they perform together. So not only to help young people who just started, but to involve all the people that came to integrate. Yeah. So I think we cannot say urgent is not important because we have to think about future. So we have to find a balance, when something happened and it's urgent. We have to do it urgent and give all the hands, on the table, as we say. But I understand that it is difficult later on still keep the people who help, the people who live there, active, engage them all the time to do some project, yes? It's not that easy, because I observed that, at the beginning many Polish people were very involved, but then they get tired with their normal life, with their problem, with inflation and, the other things. But that's the big challenge for NGOs and for some cultural institutions, for the politics, policymakers, so when we have these people, we need to make them a very good condition, not only to live, but to develop, to feel better, to combat the stereotypes and so on. So that's what I think.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, if the question is, should we prioritize the urgent need, or to take the long view and look at the second and next, third generations, I think that they are absolutely complementary. simply also because you know that, I mean, I want to be simplistic. In order to avoid problems down the line, you need to try to address the traumas, post-traumatic stress we saw that at the beginning. So you should not have people who feel they're lost in a strange land, completely abandoned, and then to see what happens with the second generation. The second generation will not go very well. That's quite obvious, I think. And why can we learn from other examples? Yeah, we definitely should try to learn from other examples, but the example of the US maybe it's not, it might be sort of unique, I would say. I lived 10 years in the States, and I was about to become an American citizen. It was my path. And I mean, the melting pot works for, it worked for the Italians, for the Irish, for Jewish people. It didn't work for black people. I mean, now, maybe the slavery is, let's say, a peculiar feature, something that we don't want to see repeated, but certainly didn't work for them. And I don't know, the Latinos, yes and no. So it's every integration is different. Every integration is different because the cultural insertion in the mainstream is different for each group, I would say. So it worked well for some groups, it doesn't necessarily work for others. I think we have still quite a few good examples in Europe as well. You mentioned the Italians in Germany, probably that's a good example. Probably we need more study about the Turkish descent, but I think that's also evolved, you know, for what I know in Germany. So we will have to see, unfortunately, the results we will see later on. But of course, we should start as soon as possible. I mean, we cannot try to have a generation of people who are traumatic, lost, and who do not feel any particular link and connection with the country where they are.
I think Europe is full of them, unfortunately. But I think I would like to open now for questions from all of you. Many of my partners from the project are also here, and we have discussed many questions over the course of the last 4 years. And we are very happy to have others here as well. So everyone who has a question is very much welcome.
I have.
Maybe you can introduce yourself with a few sentences.
My name is Natalia Shevchenko. I'm from Ukraine, and I'm working in film industry, making documentary movies. And here at the conference we were presenting. It was the first time it appeared in public, a movie about Crimea Tatars that face a very tragic story, and it started in 1944 during the Second World War, and it continues now. Not the same, it's not completely the same, but people still do not have any, can't come back to their home. This question that you asked about the perspectives, what is better, yeah? Or how can we cope with the things that we have to do right now, or it's better to, or how to think about something that you have to do for the future. But it's not maybe a question, it's like a statement that we face now in Ukraine, is that when you do not think about the future of minorities, there will be someone who thinks instead of you. And if it's okay for you, that someone will think of it. I mean that there are minorities that were completely fooled with Russian propaganda, and now we understand that it was made just to invade Ukraine. And when you do not think about the minorities you have, we didn't think about the Tatars. We didn't think about people that were living on our east, because like when you speak about Poland and about your town or cities that are full with migrants, we also have such cities and such towns, and they are mainly on the south and on the east, and that migrants were not were like made to migrate there, but we did nothing to. When we became like an independent country, we did nothing to integrate them into Ukrainian culture and to speak about them about like a part of our country. So now we face what we face. I think this is one of these problems of this one.
Questions? Okay, you want me to go to my prepared questions? I would like to come back to the question I just raised earlier, which might have been a little bit provocative. One of the reasons I asked it was that our project very much tried in all outcomes to be very clear that no matter which migration process, no matter even which side, because we have both victims and perpetrators' descendants in our project, the long-term consequences, the feeling of being different, the feeling of that memories haunt you, the feeling that trauma haunts you, is basically the same. The circumstances are different, the migration process, the countries are different, but it's a human experience of to be different, to feel pain, to feel shame, one of these aspects. So let's say there are national tendencies. Let's say, and now I'm speaking generally, I'm not speaking about one of our countries. I speak generally about national tendencies we see in Europe, actually, this unfortunately, that some stories which do not fit in a story about a nation should not be told. Let's say there are these countries. Is the European Union as a construction combining many countries? Dare the European Union to be more direct and get the difficult stuff on the table or not? My personal experience after traveling through many countries the last 4 years, telling about this project, is not that this is not the case. And this is for many, many reasons. But if my impression is true, and this is my question to you who work with Europe in a larger degree than I do, the question would be, what could then cultural institutions in the countries, if they have the possibility, do on the ground line to at least open up somehow, get the knowledge out, which is maybe not wanted on a higher level. Because for the people involved, for the people who are second and third generation, this is important work, and somebody has to do it. And of course, in the extension of that questions, anything we can do to get our findings into policies? Okay, please. Enough questions for the next half hour, I think.
So thank you very much. And no, it's very interesting when you said that the perpetrators and the victim share the same feelings in a sense, which is guilt, not a sense of guilt, because also many victims felt guilt, and the process of healing is really to get rid of this guilt by trying to making sense of it at the end of the day. Identity is a narrative, and what we're all trying to do is to make sense of it, at the end of the day. So in order to progress, let's call it like this, I think it is progress, is to have a larger narrative. And that's also what Europe can provide, which is a larger narrative. Because if you stay close, if you stay close to your regional histories, local history, national history, you can never get out of that, of course. So that's why the first contribution of Europe, to have the possibility of a larger narrative, a larger scale. Where you can also compare other examples, you can see that you're not the only one. I mean, bad things happen in Norway. I'm sure that it happens also in other countries, and so on. Now, certain lands obviously are unique, but that's a different story. That's a different story. Now, can the European Union try to counter these trends, nationalistic trends, trying to nativist basically rather than national? Because national we can discuss what is nation building, what is a nation, what is a state, but it's almost nativist because they're really looking at their local roots and so on. Well, your question was provocative. My answer could also be provocative. If you look at what these politicians say about Europe, maybe we must be doing something right, because they do criticize a lot what we do, and they do not want us to participate in their political debate, and we do it. So maybe this is a very healthy debate that we are having, because before it was under the radar. But I'm not sure that 30 years ago people had different feelings about migrants, about their neighbors, about their religion, and so on. Maybe they had the same feelings, but they didn't have the possibility, or they didn't feel that the world was changing. And maybe we're also part of how we are changing this world. So again, I'm not so pessimistic. I think that at the end of the day, because it's in the art of history bends toward justice, I think it will happen. I think we are making a contribution. I think the kind of projects that we support is good, is making a good contribution. And more important than that, it's not so much that we select the projects that we like. It's not like that, but we provide a space for good projects to come up. And it's a contribution that must come from you, must come from intellectuals, must come from activists, must come from politicians. We bureaucrats can only provide the space. And I'm very happy to see that many people take advantage of this space and do very, very good things. Looking at what the enemies of Europe say, maybe we're doing something good. That would be my answer. But we cannot oblige, obviously. We cannot oblige people, but we provide a space.
I have a question there. You wanted also to comment? Lydia, your turn afterwards. Yes, just a second. First, please.
Sorry. Yeah. Just to say that I agree, yeah, Europe has this narrative that tries to go in a different direction, and we actually wanted to do a project about this original narrative of Europe that also was about human rights, and the idea of getting these human rights for all the people, also for refugees. And I think this has got a bit lost in, as you were saying, in the nationalist movements we see all over Europe. So I think it would be very good to also stress this much more. So I agree with you on that. One of the problems we have, of course, is that those who are against migrants are also against the European Union. So they're mobilized against both. And they managed to combine this very well, so in a way, if then Europe, or there is a reaction from somewhere, this is then being taken as, you know, they want to tell us how we are supposed to be. So it's a difficult loop that you cannot evade very easily, I think. And on the other hand, I think it's, as you said, Natalia, it's time to understand, if you don't see that all the people who live in your country are the people who live in your country, they're even very often your citizens, ignoring the group and just pretending they don't belong will backfire. It's obvious for everything. So I think this is also an important message to pass on.
Lydia, please maybe also introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'm Irena Joveva from Croatia, from Istria, and together with my colleague Tamara Nikolic-Djeric, we were working on Istrian immigration. And not only us too, but all the collaborators here within this project showed that museums are very capable places to talk about, to disseminate, to problematize so-called difficult heritage. So I wonder, how do you see in the future the role of the museum, because museums in general, because not all museums or majority of the museums haven't been doing that sort of heritage. In most of the cases, it's about how beautiful our heritage is, how fantastic our artworks works are. But I have to say that this was a very demanding work for the most of us, because we were not taught to be psychologists, or we were not used to face for 4 long years with really very hard, difficult stories. So I guess since Kathrin said a couple of minutes ago that at the end of our project there were many people who were at once enthusiastic about sharing their stories. So how do you see in the future the role of the museum, and where and who should collect and disseminate those difficult stories of migrants, ex-migrants, future migrants, all 3 generations?
Whoever feels the wish to answer.
Well, museums, as you said, were not very good at gathering refugee migration stories, so it took a while for them to even take up the topic. And very often then they only took it up for a short exhibition that didn't have any continuity in the story. So in many countries I know people who then themselves got active and started gathering material on migration from very different origins, administrative material, but also material from migrants, stories, etc. So a lot is happening there, but also my impression is that at least in Austria and Germany, there's still this feeling we still need to do a lot of work to get museums, the larger institutions, to change their understanding of what they are doing in the different nation states. I know that there is a lot of activity, a lot is going on, and I hope they will move a bit faster to actually change the stories they tell. So that would be great. But also I was thinking of the museums in Germany, in particular in East Germany, in Dresden. There's a wonderful project there that looked at this problematic situation in Dresden, where you have, of course, a lot of right-wing extremism and mobilization in the streets, and the museums banded together to oppose these movements. So there is also a lot of, I think, very positive work on the part of the museums to support the anti-migrant mobilization, and to open up the spaces of discussion, and I hope that is going to continue.
Just very quickly, because we also have a network of museums and NEMO, and they're working hard in order to modernize the concept and the actual working life of a museum. And I think there is this trend that a museum is also there to serve the community where they are. So it's not just the past, it's what the community is there right now, in which position they are. So, and that, I think that's the trend that the museums are going, and I would like to see it going on like that.
More questions? Please.
Hello, my name is Lina. I'm a researcher from the Egmont Institute. And I have a question regarding the treatment of migrants that was discussed. How can we counter, or the European Union counter claims of double standards between the treatment of Ukrainian migrants, for example, or let's say Syrian? Or for example, when we talk about preserving the identity, there's a difference between preserving the identity of, let's say, Syrian migrants, or so how do we counter these claims? And then secondly, why specifically 3 generations? What is the reasoning behind it? Why not 2, or why 4? What was the logic? Thank you.
I just take the last one, because otherwise this whole meeting would have no reason. Basically because you can live for 3 generations, to make it basically. There is an interaction possible between children and their grandchildren, of course children and their parents, it becomes much more difficult when you are your great-grandparents. You often do not experience them. Also, number 2 is that you see, and this all of you might know, in all over the world actually, more and more stories from 2nd and 3rd generation, and there's a big difference between these generations, but it's always these 3 because they can interact. It's different than going back and finding out who are my great-grandparents, because you knew the people. They touched your heart. They are more part of yourself than maybe your great-great-great-great-grandfather. This was one question. So I leave it to any one of you who would like to answer the other. And I also have to say that I am very grateful that we have this possibility to talk to you, and nobody is in a position where somebody should defend something or anything like this. So this is really just a conversation, also for me and for us to get our thoughts even to a higher level and broaden our views. So who would like to answer your question, which basically was, I think, why do we see differences between where the migrants come from? Is it a right summing up from me, or how would you sum up your other question?
Would you like to answer?
I have no answer. Sorry, I have no answer. I can agree with you that we do have these double standards, and I see them in Poland, especially when we have 2 borders, Ukrainian border and Belarusian border, and we welcome with let's say, we welcome very greatly the people coming from Ukraine, and we do pushbacks the Syrians or other people who are crossing the Belarusian border. This is something that I'm really I cannot agree with, and we have here some. One of my colleagues, it's Irena Joveva. It's very known Polish activists, now being a member of the European Parliament, who is acting in the many movements, helping the people on the border, organizing a help in this Belarusian border. But well, maybe it's not very political what I would say. She is lonely with her faith, yes? So even in the European Parliament, in some politics groups, there is no full understanding, and we were discussing that, and I couldn't also agree and believe, and I wanted to do something, and then I was told that exactly is the I lose citation now, that our inhabitants and our voters, it's shown in the researches, they don't want to welcome the migrants from the other country because they are afraid. They want to, they prefer that the border is safe, that the border is guarded, and I couldn't believe that. I really couldn't believe it. I'm not a researcher, so I didn't check it, but that was something that was frustrating me. And I mean, in our country, in Poland, we do not have any common immigrant politics. Yeah, as I said, we were trying to do something in the local level, but it's not enough. About the whole European Union, we have a representative of the Commission, so I give you the floor because.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Really. No, it's a difficult question, but on the other hand, I mean, there are some objective differences, no, between Ukraine in Syria. One is the war and the fact that we, as countries, as European Union, we took sides. So, in that sense, we are in a different situation compared to what happened in Syria. The approach, though, of preserving the identity of Syrian culture or Ukrainian culture, I think it's the same. This is what we tried to do also during the Syrian crisis. Simply that we had, and I can be honest, we had fewer means that we have now with Ukraine. In the case of Ukraine now, we have launching more projects, quite interesting. They're also about exactly preserving the culture of displaced people, internally or outside Ukraine. We tried to do the same also for Syria. We did it only in Lebanon, I think, and probably in Jordan. Yeah, probably also in Jordan. But then we had fewer means, absolutely. And I also have to say it lasts so many years, it's still ongoing, and there was no clear political stance, I think, from the European Union. You know, though some member states, you remember, participated in the airlines and things like that. So there is a difference. We will have to see, but in a sense there are objective differences.
You have also a short comment, please.
I'm not sure I completely agree with the objective differences because, of course, I think as far as, this regulation that is used for the Ukrainian case is a regulation that came out of the Yugoslav war. So basically at the time when that happened, there was no regulation in place that allowed the European Union to say, we will accept these people based on one legislative piece. So that was introduced in 2001 and was never used before the Ukrainian case. So in a way, among migration researchers, this was a moment when they were feeling, wow, they are now using this regulation. Perhaps this could also be extended to other cases. As far as I know, there was some discussion whether to use the same regulation for the Syrian case. But I don't think it was not the feeling that it was a different case. I think there were people who didn't want to use this regulation. So there was, exactly as you were saying, double standards. There is the argument very often, at least in Austria, I hear that a lot. Well, we help close friends, they're nearby. That's what the Geneva Convention is all about. We are not supposed to help those who are far away. They can go to other countries that are close by. This is one of the many arguments that you hear in the national context. But that doesn't, of course, it doesn't help. Especially with the Ukrainian case, what I found particularly problematic was that only in many countries, only Ukrainian citizens were accepted to use this rule, whereas those who were not Ukrainian citizens were not accepted in all the countries under the same legislation. So in Austria, for example, if you were a Turkish citizen in Ukraine fleeing from the country, you had to go through a different regulation than the Ukrainian one. So I thought that was where the double standards really come up.
Thank you very much. We have to round off. We will now see shortly the intervention of Mrs. Joveva. I think she is ready now.
Najprej se vam iskreno zahvaljujem za povabilo na dogodek. Žal mi službene obveznosti niso dovolile udeležbe v živo, me pa veseli, da vas lahko vsaj takole digitalno nagovorim. Torej, Združeni v različnosti je moto Evropske unije. To naj bi zdaj že vsi vedeli, ampak nekateri ne razumejo, ne želijo razumeti, pravzaprav. Ampak Evropejke in Evropejci, združeni v Unijo, so tu za mir in blaginjo ljudi, hkrati pa je ta Unija bogata s številnimi različnimi kulturami, tradicijami in jeziki. In med prednostmi te naše Unije je recimo tudi prost pretok ljudi. Ljudje migriramo, se selimo, premikamo, potujemo. Migracije niso popolnoma nič novega, niti niso nastale zaradi Unije, niti niso samo del Unije ali prej omenjenega prostega pretoka ljudi v njej. Migracije pač so in vedno bodo, dogajajo se že od nekdaj, a kljub temu jim nekateri pripisujejo nekakšen status izrednosti, odmik od normalnega stanja, karkoli naj bi že to pomenilo. Temu smo bili priča med in po vojni v nekdanji Jugoslaviji, pa ob arabski pomladi, danes se s tem srečujemo tudi, ampak ne samo, v luči vojne v Ukrajini. Migracije, takšne in drugačne, za sabo nepreklicno potegnejo tudi prespraševanje lastne identitete in iskanje odgovora na vprašanje, kdo sploh sem. Prav tako prinesejo ukvarjanje z večplastnostjo identitete z vidika nacionalnosti, etničnosti in drugih prostorsko utemeljenih občutkov pripadanja. Bila sem res iskreno počaščena, ko sem dobila povabilo za sodelovanje v tem projektu v Sloveniji. In v video izjavi za razstavo Od juga sem svojo identiteto predstavila z naslednjimi besedami. Sem Slovenka z makedonskim poreklom, tako se doživljam in to živim. Moj dobesedno materni jezik je makedonščina, moj materni jezik je pa slovenščina. In ponosna sem, da sem bila kot Slovenka izvoljena v Evropski parlament in da tam zastopam interese Slovenije in Slovenk ter Slovencev. To je moja identiteta. Tudi jaz sem se spraševala starše, sorodnike, prijatelje, konec koncev. In odgovor? Ponavljam se, ampak res sem ponosna. V prvi vrsti na starše, ker smo doma negovali tako makedonsko kot slovensko kulturo, tako makedonski kot slovenski jezik. Ker zaradi njiju poznam svoje poreklo in sem nanj ponosna. A zaradi njiju ne poznam samo svoje preteklosti, ampak tudi svojo sedanjost in prihodnost. Poznam to toliko bolje, svojo domovino, Slovenijo, predvsem pa samo sebe. Ponosna sem. Nisem pa ponosna na marsikaj drugega, kar sicer ni povezano s politiko, ki jo predstavljam sama, je pa povezano s politiko na splošno. Žal. V zadnjih letih smo namreč priča političnim silam, ki izpostavljajo kritična stališča do priseljevanja in socialne integracije. Vse več evropskih vlad govori o multikulturalizmu kot negativnem pojavu, ki naj bi vodil v ekonomsko neenakost, družbeno razdrobljenost in izgubo kulturne identitete. Želim si, da vsi ostanejo oziroma postanejo, če to še niso, pristni in empatični, uvidevni in kulturni v obnašanju in v diskurzu. Zavedajmo se vsega bogatstva in vse širine življenja, ki nam je bila z raznovrstnimi identitetami dana in izkoristimo to v lasten prid. Vodimo najboljša različica sebe in s tem nastavimo ogledalo vsem tistim, ki na nas gledajo zviška in nam na družbeni lestvici neupravičeno dodeljujejo mesta nekje pri dnu. Kulturna raznovrstnost bogati tako posameznice in posameznike kot družbo, vso Evropsko unijo. Zavedajmo se tega. Spoštujmo različnost, pa naj bo to verska, nacionalna, rasna. Spoštujmo vse spolne usmerjenosti. Spoštujmo. Pika. Naj še izkoristim priložnost ter vsem ustvarjalkam in ustvarjalcem razstave čestitam za prejem ugledne nagrade Evropske muzejske akademije. Razstava resnično odpira kompleksne in težke zgodbe o migracijah po Evropi. Vaši predlogi pa ponujajo osveščanje o dolgotrajnih posledicah vojn in prisilnih migracij. Vsekakor bomo mi, ki nismo del prej opisane sramotne politike, vaše predloge preučili ter poskušali kaj premakniti na način, da ne bodo ostali samo črke na papirju. Želim vam uspešen dogodek in prijetno razpravo z mojimi kolegicami in kolegi iz Evropskega parlamenta. Srečno!
This was the best ending, maybe. It should have been the beginning, but it was a very good ending, so we have to say it to her in person. I would like to invite all of you to 1 hour with cocktails for those who want, just in the member space, not far from here. And in the name of my museum, the Westakte Museum, and the director, Jon Olsen, who is also here, who had the pleasure to lead 7 fantastic institutions, colleagues from several cultures, countries who really contributed to this project. We really became friends and we really worked hard. I thank everyone for the possibility to be in this room, and especially, of course, I would like to thank the 3 of you for your personal story and insights, for the work you're doing continuously, so it's so important for Europe, for the possibility to work on this project, and for your interest in these tendencies, which I have confirmed now, gotten confirmed is much deeper than I knew. So I thank you very much for being here, taking the time. And thank you very much contributing with your knowledge about migration, not only in Europe. So thank you to all of you. And please follow us to some talking. Wait, Maria, wait. Maria is the best project assistant, but I have control about this because I asked you in the beginning. You know, after these 4 years of the great possibility to work with this project, we have 5 overall findings and 5 overall solutions how to maybe incorporate the 3-generational perspective in policies. They are very general, of course, but they are based on the 164 interviews with people from 7 countries and the 3 generations. And it would be a huge honor if you could be the one whom I officially, in the name of all partners, could give our recommendations, and hopefully somehow they come. Maybe sometime we will, sometime we will find them in the policies, parts of it. That would be a huge honor.
Thank you very much. Of course, I asked you for some more copies, and I will pass it to the commissions and to the president of our parliament, Mr. Roberta Metsola. So they reach it, and I tell the story further, because I hope that we can change the world, we can change the Europe, if we do something. If we not do anything, there will be no changes. So thank you very, very much for your support and your words and continuing. So thank you very, very much for your support and your words and